What's up, everybody? Big Herc 916, getting down fresh out. You know how we do it over here. You're tuned in to another edition of Prison Talk, but this time I got a special guest. Richard Williams worked in the California Department of Corrections for 10 years, has some hellified stories, and we're going to get the real. So, Richard, working in the Department of Corrections throughout those 10 years, what would you say was one of the most violent prisons that you worked at based on just the riots and the gangs and stuff like that?
Well, I spent the majority of my career at RJ Donovan, Richard J. Donovan Prison, which is in Southern California. It's a mainline level 3. Um, so my experiences are based on that. However, about 3 years of that time, that 10 years was spent in the hole. I was an ASSEG sergeant for 2 years, and prior to that, I was assigned to the hole for at least a year and a half, something like that.
Okay. So while you were there, were there a lot of riots kicking off? Were there a lot of just like racial conflict? I mean, what was the atmosphere like?
We didn't have a lot of riots. We had a few riots while I was there, but there's always a lot of racial tension. Even when there wasn't any violence, there was still racial tension. Being that close to the border, drugs are huge in Donovan. Drugs are huge. So a lot of the fights, a lot of the tension was over money.
Mm. What was the main racial tension? Was it between the whites and the blacks, or the blacks and Hispanics, Hispanics and the whites? What was most of the racial tension there?
Easier was blacks and Mexicans, blacks and Hispanics always. Very few white boys were involved in anything. Um, on occasion, they would act up, but it was the majority of the population in Donovan was Hispanic, then blacks, and then whites.
So was it over debts being owed, primarily people getting drugs and not paying for it, or somebody like disrespecting? What was most of the conflict over?
Disrespect.
Mm.
For instance, like the basketball court was right next to the soccer field,
Mm.
so that area was always a area of contention, as well as the handball courts. So if a soccer ball went on the basketball court, or if the basketball went over into the soccer, it was going to be a rough day for us.
Wow, just over the basketball or the soccer ball, just that quick, huh?
Over respect. Here's an example. There was a soccer game going on right next to the basketball game. The basketball game was heated. The soccer game was heated because these dudes are very competitive.
Yeah.
Soccer ball went into the basketball court when the basketball game was at its peak. One of the basketball players, not thinking, kicked the soccer ball over the fence.
Ah.
There's 3 fences at Donovan. One's not electrified, the middle's electrified, and the other one's not electrified. Once he kicked that ball, it was a wave of Hispanics and a wave of blacks. And I'm a pretty tough dude. There's been very few situations I've actually been scared and fearful of anything. But that day, to see 200 plus dudes moving towards each other with no good intentions, all you can do as a corrections officer was stand back. So I just backed up against the fence. Ain't shit else you could do.
Yeah. Wow, man, that's crazy. It's you know, uh, I know because working in the state, a lot of people don't realize, how different it is in the state prison than the feds. And like me and you discussed yesterday, California, you think about diversity, you think about all the different nationalities, but California, like I've talked to people all over the country, is one of the most racially divided prison systems in the world. In the world. California, I mean, you've seen it, man. I mean, there is no way that it, and I was in the feds and I had a Mexican cellmate, but there's no way in the state you'll see a black and Mexican celled up, or a black and a white dude, or if I'm talking to a white dude on the yard, there's a problem with working out with a white guy. It ain't happening.
It's not happening, and it's by design. In Donovan, we had four different, actually 5 yards. I work primarily 2 yard, but every yard has about 1,000 convicts on each yard. Of those 1,000 convicts, you may have 20 COs on staff at any one given time on that facility, and some of them are up in gun posts, some of them are walking the yard, some of them in housing units. So the only way we can control the prison is through the consent of the inmate and dividing the inmate. So that means these guys have to buy into our system. The
Mm.
way we sell that system is racially. Team up with your people, sell up with your people, side with your people. It's an indoctrination.
And like it's a really, I look at like a micro study of the macro, because when they take what they've implemented in prisons and applied in communities, in different areas, whether it be LA, the Bay Area, Sacramento, it's a little bit more diverse in the Northern California, but Southern California, it's almost like unsaid things where, like, even if you're in a certain lowrider community, you don't go past a certain street. If you're in, over here, this is our cruising, you cruise over there, and it's like you said, you hit the yard, you're a young guy, you might have went to school with some brothers or some black guys or some Mexican or Hispanic guys, and you're cool, but when you hit the pen, there's rules. And so, the brainwash starts once you get to the pen and you start having to follow these rules. And then when you get out, you are taking what you learned in prison and now applying it to the youngsters, and it just perpetuates, and it creates the divide on the street where, like you said, if blacks and Mexicans came together, oh my God, it'd be a wrap. You seen it in the pen, it would be a wrap.
It's just like you and I talked about yesterday. The only way they can control us is through division, right? So our society is ruled by elitists, and they control the masses through division. They always give us little issues to bicker about. The first and primary one is racism, and it's magnified in the prison. As soon as you hit the yard, even before you hit the yard, when you hit the county jail, every county jail know what's up. Where
Yeah.
your people at? Find them, identify with them, stay with them. It don't matter what you did on the street. And then it goes from the county to the state. And the state is the same way. When you go to reception center, where your people, find your people. Even if you're not gang affiliated, you had better team up with your colored people. If you got black Christians, you better go with the black Christians. If there's white Christians, you better go with the white Christians. But you gotta side with your people. There's consequences to not doing it.
Um, and it's so petty, man. And it's like I remember um a guy telling me, you got to know, like, like, say for example, in a chow hall, you got to walk all the way around to go to the line over. You don't cut tables. I don't care if there's nobody in the chow hall. You do not cut. You're not going to cut through tables. When you go to your seat, you walk around. You don't walk, because people don't know if somebody's going to come next to them and try to cut them. If there's something jumping off, why are you cutting a table? I mean, there's so many different things. And these people on the street, a lot of them, especially these college students, they're so ignorant when they start talking all this stuff. They don't have no clue how serious this shit is.
They have no clue. The consequences of sin in prison are a lot more severe than on the street. You can offend somebody on the street and just say, okay, you can talk real strong today and then walk away from it. No harm, no foul. In prison, where there's conflict, is conflict until it's dealt with. And it's usually dealt with in a violent way. Even if
Yeah.
something as little as sitting in the wrong spot, staring at somebody too long, sitting on the wrong side of the weight pile when they had the weight pile, because I was there when they had the weight pile, and I was there when they took the weight pile. And actually, I saw the level of violence skyrocket when he took the weight powers.
Mm.
So little things, where you sit out on the yard. That's the essay table. That's the brothers table. That's the woods table. Handball courts belong to the essays everywhere in California. So it's just it's a totally different world. It's a microcosm of what happens on the outside. Just consequences are a lot more severe.
Now, who would you say, if, from your perspective, having worked in the system, who would you say runs the prisons? I mean, would you say, as far as demographic of national, who pretty much control? I know in different areas of California it shifts, but from what you've seen, who was pretty much running the prisons in that area?
In California, when I worked there, it was the Mexicans. They controlled it. They had the numbers, they had the structure, and they had it all. They had
And would you say they're the most organized?
I would say they're the most organized. I would also say that the consequences of getting out of line are probably the most severe.
Yeah,
Next to the Woods don't play it either, but I think they're a little bit different because the Woods chastise because they don't have as many of them, so they
but
really have to stay tight.
you know what? I had another friend who worked in the system for about 20 years, and he was telling me like one thing. He we have some interesting conversations similar to what me and you had, and he worked in Northern California, San Quentin, Tracy, a couple other spots up there. But he used to tell me like uh, the woods when it comes to like checking their own paperwork, making sure you're not like under that profile of being a messing with kids or anything like foul. They do not play. But he's to tell me like some of these brothers like, dude, he's like, dude, you talking all the stuff. I said, I know about you. These dudes ain't even checked you in. He said if it had been Wood, you'd have been checked in because they give passes. It's not like they don't. The blacks in prison, they let a lot of shit fly, which wouldn't fly, like you said, in the woods, or even the Mexicans, they find out like you got some foul shit. It don't matter who you're off the yard.
Exactly. I think from my perspective, from what I saw, the blacks in the prison are a lot like the blacks on the street. You got cliques, but ain't no real unity. And I defy anybody to point to me a real black shot caller. Those don't exist.
Wow,
You might run your clique.
wow,
You might have a few people that listen to what you say, but ain't no shots being called from Northern California to Southern California with no blacks.
wow. That's deep, man.
They're very divided when it comes to the race things. When it comes to interracial matters, they're very divided. When we're working with each other,
That goes to say a lot because I had a discussion with a guy on the street and he was talking to me about race and this and that. And I said, dude, look, to be honest, I can't find five black men that I know that so-called are friends that would put their money together to start a business. I can't find five without somebody arguing or somebody not putting ego aside or somebody thinking they're better. There's no organization, man. There's no the structure for black community. It's raggedy. And I'm not trying to knock blacks. There are some doing stuff, but for the most part, it ain't like you said. The Hispanics I knew in prison, shit was tight. They got out. They shit was organized. The Italians I met in prison, the Asians tight. You know what I mean? The few like foreigners I met, like Russian or me, tight. You don't ever hear about them telling on each other.
you can go on almost any state and find a Chinatown. Find me a black town.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Every the day, it points to our divisiveness from birth. So, my theory, my thoughts on that: this is generations and years and hundreds of years in the making. We're robbed of our identity, and we've been struggling to find it. There's a lot of mistrust, distrust, and misinformation among our people. Probably the worst thing is they've identified the black culture as gang culture, and the two are not the same. The two are not the same. So, like you and I discussed the other day, we are black culture. Gang culture is gang culture.
That's right. Yeah, you're right.
Gang culture, you have black gangs, you have white gangs, you have Mexican gangs, Asian gangs. Every race has a gang, but only in our culture has the gang culture been labeled our entire race.
You know, how hard would you say it is for a person in prison who's trying to actually change their ways and avoid all the gang culture stuff, get their shit together to get out to make a difference? How hard would you say that is in the California prison system?
Well, I watched it happen several times. It takes a maturation process, but it is very difficult. You don't have the mental toughness or the discipline or the wisdom to stand alone. But what I learned, I watched a lot of guys in that 10, 15-year mark. They just don't care about what's going on in the prison, and their minds have been elevated outside of the prison walls, right? And so once the mind is outside the prison walls, the body is there too. So those guys, you see a lot of guys like the lifers, they're the easiest and most intelligent people you're ever going to meet. And they may say they're in a gang, but they don't identify with gang culture because their mind has been elevated. Guys go in there and get educated one way or the other, either through the prison education system or through their own will and desire to be better people within prison, to find peace within the walls. But it's extremely difficult because it's easy to get caught up in those first couple of years. A riot, a fight, um, ice cream in the kitchen is enough to fuck your time off. A regular fist fight over basketball is enough to fuck your time off and just destroy your mentality. 30 days in the hole and being mistreated and treated like an animal is enough to change a man's personality. And this type of stuff happens daily, several times daily within the prison walls. So it's rather extremely difficult to stay focused and have a renewing in the mind, but it can be done. I've seen it done.
Well, we're gonna get into it on some more topics, man. Um, I don't want to. I don't want to spill over. There's so much I want to ask you, but we want to keep our fans subscribed, watching, supporting. So we're gonna cut this into another video. But hey, man, Big Herc 916, fresh out, Richard Williams.